The movie begins in 1992 with Mercer being released from prison. We see him waking up his son, Antoine, to get ready for school. However, it's clear their relationship is very strained. Mercer tries to talk to Antoine to reconnect, but Antoine refuses to engage, blaming him for leaving him to live alone with his mother and grandmother all these years. He tells Mercer that he needed him as a father for support, which leaves Mercer speechless. It's also revealed that Antoine now lives with Mercer because his mother and grandmother recently passed away in a car accident. Determined to learn everything about his son and make a good impression, Mercer hopes to steer Antoine away from the dangerous path he's on. Before Antoine leaves the house, Mercer insists he come straight home after school and not hang out with friends. Later, Mercer drives to work, stopping at a grocery store on the way. Inside, he notices two men harassing the store owner, trying to rob her. Mercer intervenes to protect her, but the two men don't recognize who he is and pull a gun on him, threatening to either kill him or force him to leave. Suddenly, Mercer's old friend, who happens to be the leader of the gang, enters. He reprimands the men for threatening Mercer, saying Mercer is a longtime friend and they're lucky. They didn't act rashly. Meanwhile, in a separate location, two men named Reagan and Dennis are discussing a new operation they're planning, a heist to rob Pluton Metals Company. They're targeting the platinum stored there, which is extremely valuable, like diamonds. They decide to construct a secret vault to store the stolen platinum once the job is done. Reagan tells Dennis he'll head home to discuss the final details with Lowell, their leader. When Reagan and Dennis meet Lowell, he takes them to the factory where the heist will happen. He explains that the shipment of platinum, worth $10 million, has already arrived and is stored in the factory's vault. However, there's a major challenge. If someone triggers the alarm in the security office, the vault will be sealed with a steel door, making it impossible to open without the Los Angeles Police Department. Despite this, Reagan assures Lowell that they're up to the task and can execute the plan perfectly. However, Lowell feels apprehensive, knowing that even a small mistake could ruin everything. As they leave, we cut to Mercer driving into the factory, where he works as a security guard since his release from prison. Upon arriving, he enters the monitoring room to meet Joseph, his supervisor. Together, they watch the news about the upcoming verdict in the case of 4 officers accused of killing an African-American man. Joseph comments that if the judge doesn't deliver justice, there will be civil unrest due to racial tensions between black and white communities. Outside the courthouse, crowds anxiously await the verdict. Mercer, however, is indifferent to the situation and focuses on his work. The judge announces that the 4 officers are acquitted, triggering an immediate backlash from the black community. Protests erupt, and the city quickly descends into chaos. Most white residents lock themselves in their homes, fearing retaliation from the black community, who begin rioting across the city. At the same time, Antoine is seen walking home from school, and he was watching what was happening on TV, becoming furious at what he saw, feeling that they were being oppressed everywhere. This drove him to go down and join the protests happening in the streets. Meanwhile, on the other side, Reagan was observing the chaos and told Lowell that this was the perfect time to execute their plan. With the entire city in upheaval due to the verdict, most people were staying in their homes, and the police were focused on controlling the protests. Reagan managed to convince Lowell, and they immediately headed to the designated meeting spot. At the same time, the factory manager gathered the workers and informed them that they would be leaving early because of the ongoing events in the streets. Only Joseph, Mercer, and the main gate security guard were to remain behind to protect the facility. After everyone left, Mercer started feeling deeply worried about Antoine, knowing that they lived on the same street where the protests were happening. He asked Joseph for permission to leave and bring Antoine back to the factory for his safety. Joseph quickly approved and issued Mercer a security pass to leave. As Mercer walked through the chaotic streets, he felt anxious, fearing that someone might attack him or harm him. When he reached the house, he searched for Antoine, only to discover that he wasn't there. He realized that Antoine had gone out to join the protests. Mercer immediately went back out and began searching for Antoine, wandering the streets late into the evening. By chance, he ran into an old friend DeVille, who offered Mercer a gun to protect himself. Mercer declined, determined to stay away from anything that might harm him or land him back in prison. He continued searching through the streets until he finally found Antoine. Mercer convinced him to get into the car, and the two drove off. During the drive, Antoine was visibly upset, angry that Mercer had taken him away from the protests when he wanted to stand up for justice for the victim. As they drove, they came across a police checkpoint. Since they were black, the officers stopped them and subjected them to a lengthy interrogation, despite letting other cars pass without issue. The officer, seemingly paranoid, questioned them extensively, fearing they might be planning something. After what had happened, eventually they were allowed to leave, but both Mercer and Antoine were deeply frustrated by the encounter, knowing they couldn't speak up or risk being arrested. At the same time, Lowell's gang arrived at the factory. Reagan was the first to get out of the car and approached the guard at the gate. The guard was surprised to see anyone near the factory at that hour. As he started to ask why Reagan was there, trying to explain that the workers had left early, Reagan didn't give him a chance to respond. Instead, he used a taser to incapacitate the guard. After that, the rest of the gang tied the guard to a pole to ensure he couldn't move or alert anyone during the operation. They then entered the factory to proceed with their plan, unaware that someone else was inside the building. Based on their information, the night shift was supposed to only include the main gate guard. Meanwhile, Joseph, unaware of what had just happened at the gate, left the surveillance room to use the restroom. At that moment, the gang entered the factory, but they were shocked when Joseph emerged from the restroom. He instinctively tried to draw his weapon to confront them, but one of Lowell's men acted first, shooting him. Joseph collapsed to the ground instantly. Reagan was furious about what Lowell's men had done and raised his weapon at the man who had shot Joseph. However, Lowell intervened, calming the situation and reminding them that any mistakes during the operation would be their collective responsibility. He insisted they ignore what had happened and stick to the plan. The gang then proceeded toward the vault containing the platinum and began working on opening it. After some time, they were close to breaking the vault door and were trying to move quickly to avoid triggering an emergency response. However, unbeknownst to them, Joseph was still alive. He crawled on the ground, struggling to reach the surveillance room. Once there, he activated the alarm connected to the steel cover that would seal the vault. Tragically, Joseph died immediately after pressing the alarm. The gang was shocked when they heard the alarm go off, fearing that someone from the staff or security was still inside the factory. To make matters worse, the steel cover began descending from the ceiling to seal the vault. Reagan, desperate to salvage the situation, spotted a forklift nearby and quickly drove it toward the steel cover to push it away from the vault. In his haste, Reagan accidentally injured his fellow gang member, Copeland, whose leg was crushed within seconds. Copeland screamed in agony, and the gang found themselves panicking, torn between helping their injured friend and focusing on the vault, which they were about to lose. Meanwhile, the alarm had reached the police, who immediately dispatched a helicopter to survey the factory from above. As the helicopter flew over, the officers observed that the factory appeared quiet, with no lights on and no signs of activity. Assuming there was no ongoing robbery, the helicopter left. At this point, it became clear that the gang had turned off the lights and paused their work to avoid detection. Reagan eventually succeeded in pushing the steel cover away from the vault, but the situation was complicated by Copeland's critical injury. The gang members asked Lowell what they should do about Copeland, who was bleeding heavily and needed urgent medical attention. Lowell coldly declared that the money was their top priority and that the plan had to succeed at all costs. To everyone's shock, Lowell ordered them to amputate Copeland's leg to solve the problem quickly. Despite their hesitation, the gang reluctantly followed Lowell's orders, cutting off Copeland's leg. Lowell didn't seem concerned about whether this decision would benefit them or not. As the leader of the gang, his word was final, leaving the rest with no choice but to obey. They cut off Copeland's leg, and he keeps screaming, wishing for death because of the unbearable pain. But no one cares, and they're not even afraid of him dying since he's black, knowing the police wouldn't pay much attention. After that, they continue working on the safe to open it. Eventually they succeed, and the vault unlocks, revealing the platinum bars inside. Overjoyed, they believe their plan has finally worked, and the shipment is now theirs. Meanwhile, Mercer and Antoine arrive at the factory in their car. As they approach, Mercer notices that the main gate is open, and that no guard is stationed there. He assumes the guard might have stepped away for a bathroom break, and doesn't think much of it. Taking Antoine with him, they enter the factory. Antoine then tells Mercer that he needs to use the restroom. Mercer points him in the right direction and lets him go alone while he heads toward the surveillance room, where Joseph is usually stationed. The moment Mercer enters the surveillance room, he is shocked to find Joseph's lifeless body lying on the ground. Realizing that an attack has taken place, he quickly opens a drawer, grabs his gun, and heads toward the vault. At that moment, Antoine is inside the restroom, unaware that Dennis, one of Lowell's men, is also there. The moment Dennis spots Antoine, he pulls a gun on him and forces him outside, taking him to the rest of the gang. Meanwhile, Mercer steps out of the surveillance room, armed and ready. The second he does, he comes face to face with Lowell's men, and an intense shootout breaks out between them. Bullets fly everywhere until one of Lowell's men manages to shoot Mercer in the arm, causing him to drop his gun. But Mercer is smart. Instead of staying put and risking execution, he quickly makes a run for it before they can close in on him. The gang members, realizing he has vanished, begin searching for him. Mercer sneaks toward the garage and finds Regging the getaway vehicle to transport the stolen platinum. Taking advantage of the moment, Mercer creeps up behind him and delivers a powerful blow to his head, knocking him unconscious. He then removes a crucial car part to disable the vehicle, preventing them from escaping. Meanwhile, Dennis arrives with Antoine and presents him to Lowell. Since Antoine had been away from the main gang, he had no knowledge of what had just happened inside the factory. Lowell, skeptical, questions Antoine about his presence. Terrified, Antoine tells him that his father is a factory worker, and he had come to check on him because he works the night shift. But when he arrived, he found that all the workers had left early. He begs Lowell to let him go, promising that he won't report anything to the police. Lowell remains silent for a moment, contemplating his response. At the same time, Mercer watches from a distance, carefully observing everything. Nearby, Copeland is still lying on the ground, screaming in agony. His cries irritate Lowell, who is trying to focus. In frustration, Lowell suddenly pulls out his gun and executes Copeland right in front of Antoine and Mercer, shocking them both. After that, Lowell allows Antoine to leave under the condition that he forgets everything he saw inside the factory. As Antoine walks out of the factory, Lowell's men approach their boss, informing him about Mercer, the factory guard who unexpectedly appeared, and engaged them. Lowell instantly realizes that Antoine had lied to him. If Mercer is a guard, then he is most likely Antoine's father. Without hesitation, Lowell raises his gun and aims it at Antoine just before he can exit the factory, commanding him to turn back. Either he hands over Regim, or Lowell will execute Antoine. He then orders his men to search the entire factory for Mercer, warning them not to return unless they find him. Meanwhile, the police send another helicopter to inspect the factory. The moment Mercer hears the sound of its rotors, he rushes to the rooftop, waving desperately, hoping to be noticed. But the officers don't see him, and the helicopter flies away. Just then, one of Lowell's men ambushed Mercer, attempting to kill him for what he has done. But Mercer is stronger and quickly overpowers him, taking him down in a matter of seconds. He then lifts the man's lifeless body and throws it off the rooftop, letting it crash right in front of Lowell and his crew. Seeing this, Lowell grows tense, realizing things are falling apart. Furious, he grits his teeth in frustration. Meanwhile, Mercer heads to the storage area where he has Regem locked up. There, he tells Regem that his father executed their wounded friend because he was in too much pain. Regem is completely shocked, unable to believe his father would do such a thing to his closest companion. Suddenly, Lowell's voice booms through a microphone. He tells Mercer that he has Antoine and demands an exchange regime for Antoine within minutes, or he will kill the boy. Additionally, he orders Mercer to return the car parts he had stolen, ensuring that he and his son can walk away safely. After delivering the ultimatum, Lowell and Dennis begin loading the platinum shipment into the vehicle, preparing everything for their escape. Mercer, left with no choice, takes Regem and heads to the meeting point. The moment he arrives, Lowell grabs the car parts from him and quickly installs them in the truck carrying the platinum bars. But before anyone can act, gunfire suddenly erupts, echoing throughout the factory. Mercer grabs Antoine, shielding him from the chaos while simultaneously trying to take down Lowell. Bullets fly as both sides engage in a brutal shootout. During the firefight, Dennis is struck in the back, causing him to bleed profusely. Regem, watching his friend suffer, is overcome with anger, blaming Lowell for everything. His resentment toward his father reaches its peak. As the battle intensifies, Mercer and Antoine manage to reach the getaway truck carrying the platinum. Regem and Dennis, having now turned against Lowell, join them. Regem officially declares war on his father, and together, they all flee the factory in the truck, leaving Lowell and his last remaining henchman behind. However, Lowell is not one to give up easily. He jumps into Mercer's abandoned car and immediately pursues them, firing relentlessly at their vehicle, attempting to bring it to a stop. Mercer, determined to save Dennis, speeds through the streets, pushing the truck to its limits in an effort to get him to a hospital. But tragically, Dennis succumbs to his wounds before they can reach safety. Regem is devastated by his friend's death, his grief turning into fury. With vengeance burning in his eyes, he opens the truck's door and starts firing back at Lowell. Even though he is critically wounded during the exchange, he manages to take out Lowell's last remaining henchman. Now only Lowell himself is left. The chase continues through the city streets, both vehicles weaving dangerously between traffic. Eventually, Lowell lands another shot, this time hitting Regem fatally, ending his life. At that moment, Mercer loses control of the truck, causing it to flip over, crashing violently onto the road. Lowell pulls up beside the wreckage, stepping out to inspect the scene. His frustration mounts when he sees that the platinum bars have spilled all over the ground. Ignoring them for the moment, he approaches Dennis, who is barely alive, and coldly apologizes before finishing him off with 2 bullets. Finally, he turns toward Mercer, who is struggling to crawl out of the wreckage. Just as Lowell raises his gun to deliver the final shot, Antoine, in an act of sheer desperation, grabs a gun and fires, killing Lowell instantly. Mercer is left in shock, staring at his son in disbelief. The very thing he had feared for so long has now come true. Antoine has taken a life, stepping onto the same dark path Mercer himself once walked. Realizing what must be done, Mercer takes Antoine and leaves the scene before the police arrive. He abandons the platinum-filled truck in the street, knowing that if they were caught, the system would pin everything on them simply because they are black. And with that, the film comes to an end.